what's the music do? Anything that's raging inside you. This won't hurt me. And moves and moves, seems to whisper, hang on you. Twisted transistor.
Hello everybody and welcome to Amphlett Reviews, back with another Hong Kong content review. Continuing on with the Mr. Vampire franchise, we're at number 4 now on the Eureka edition box set, Mr. Vampire Saga 4, technically if you want to say it, released in 1998, 1 year after the third one, and we are 1 year every single year now into these films. And as mentioned, this franchise has been very experimental, very fluid and very open, and just kind of not doing the same things twice. And they are experimenting, they are changing with the formula a little bit, and that's pretty entertaining for an audience member, you know, who's going to get something different each time. This time we do not have Lam Ching in it, which is sacrilege. It's kind of like, what is going on? Like, we don't have our main star in your franchise. Reason for this is because he was doing the 5th movie, Vampire vs. Vampire, which is also available on this edition. And Mr. Vampire 4 acts more like a spin-off movie more than a traditional sequel, but I will dive into that as we go along. This time around we have Anthony Chang, which was in the first Mr. Vampire film, which is one of the Priest characters that was at the start of the film and appears at the end of the film with the hopping vampires. Really cool little detail, the fact they brought back a character that's not been in any of the other franchise since that first movie, and they said, hey, there's a spin-off kind of sequel entry, we'll bring back an established character, at least one person, which is the only returning character from these movies that's come back in this one, you know, and bring him back as the priest, and we'll do a storyline with him and some other characters, including his apprentice and a rival kind of priest as well, Buddhist Priest, lives literally right next door to him. And this rival priest is Rumar, if I'm saying the name correctly, which was the character that was in The Dead and the Deadly, which also did a small cameo within Mr. Vampire 3, which is a kind of best friends and buddies with Sammo Hung. Odd couple situation going on in terms of the story between Anthony Wong's priest character and this Buddhist priest. Interesting idea in the sense of having a bit of a back and forth comedy. They both don't like each other. They're both, I don't really know what the reason why is, but I'll get into that a little later. And they basically have a lot of buffoonery and hijinks and just trying to get at each other essentially in terms of both their kind of practice, in terms of their abilities, which is demonstrated during the first 45 minutes. And they have some companion characters as well, and kind of apprentice also gets wrapped up in this. This is still set within the world of Mr. Vampires, and we have hopping vampires back again in this, which is great. And we have full flesh, more traditional type of vampire kind of action going on. In terms of the opening set piece with Anthony Wong's character, Priest was in the forest. He's basically transporting these hopping vampires to a location. He gets ambushed by a fox demon, which is a real cool little sequence, which is really badass and really demonstrates some of the kind of the weaponry work and some of the practical effects and the spooky kind of nature of it. Very fitting in line of the previous movies, which have established him not just vampires, but also ghouls and demons and ghosts and all sorts. And this kind of fox demon is very much a kind of a wink and a nod to the first one that was established, I believe, and also the erotic ghost story movies as well. While it does have a good idea, while I do think on paper there is something here in terms of an odd couple situation, established character that we want to see a bit more about, having a more traditional kind of vampire, which is a bit more ghoulish and has more kind of bite marks and kind of showing the strength, and some of the stuff in the forest that we have later on during the film is pretty cool. And there's some bit more of traditional fight sequences, a bit more high stakes in terms of what happens, and making a bit more of a threatening, dangerous kind of presence compared to the more sillier, goofier that we've been seeing previously. So it's actually cool to see some kind of makeup effects, which I do believe is on this edition. I believe it's that little ghoul there, which is quite cool, and I think it's an actual like high royalty vampire, which makes sense why it's a bit more stronger, and they're transporting it from one location to the other, and it manages to escape and kill a lot of other gods in between that. And this film is really disappointing and a massive slog to get through. I was quite on board for a little bit, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, 45 minutes out of your hour-and-a-half movie, you have spent kind of teasing us a little bit of, well, what's going to happen. We know something's going to happen. It's a very, very simple story in terms of an odd couple situation. vampires come into it, and that is it. That's the story. It's just these two priests have to come together, use their abilities, their resources to take out a much stronger, more nastier vampire. Cool, brilliant. What are you going to do with it? The first kind of 45 minutes is a bit of a struggle to get through. You know, a lot of hijinks, a lot of back and forth in terms of the comedy, a lot of useless kind of sequences and conversations, and kind of, you know, a bit of a feud between these two, which we don't really know why. There's a whole possession sequence which goes on for way too long. However, it does have a cool payoff with the Buddhist priest kind of dishing out some of that kind of hate back to him, which I think is quite funny. The film is a slog to get through, and it does take way too long. You know, you spend 45 minutes spinning its wheels, taking way too long to get to some of the good stuff. And then when you do get to it, for some reason, it decides to go back to the humor, which is just frustrating to say the least. And it's very unfunny, it's extremely annoying, and just goes on and on and on. And it takes away for some of that kind of goodwill that you've established. You know I'm referring to Yun-Hua, if I'm saying him correctly, the legendary, awesome villainous character and actor that is just awesome and oozes badass, from Police Story 3 to Eastern Condors. One of my favorite actors, actually, in terms of a Hong Kong villain and just a performer in general. Massive collection of brilliant movies, and he plays a female god in this film, and it is absolutely awful. I don't know what is going on. The fact that they're really hammering that up, the fact they're really kind of going for it, and, you know, a massive detriment to the film, you know, especially towards the third act of the film, when he becomes a vampire, and then you've got this whole weird kind of feminine kind of, you know, back and forth, pretending to be a vampire himself, and it's just really bizarre performance. I don't blame the actor. Obviously, it's a paycheck. Obviously, that type of humor was very popular during the 80s. I don't really understand it, if I'm being honest. You know, I don't mind it in places here and there, but I know Mr. Vampire as a franchise is more towards a comedy, more towards a, you know, fantasy kind of level. But the first three movies have demonstrated a bit of restraint in places. They managed to have a good balance of that sort of darker humor with some of the more slapstick kind of comedy. This film is just does not care. The fact that Amphlett Wong's character just kind of beefs up into a kind of a Superman, and it could have been something quite special and something quite back to basics and something quite simple for the film's trying to go for. But unfortunately, it doesn't hit the mark. It takes way too long to get to some cool vampire kind of action. There is no balance this time around. It's very much one-sided, and, you know, even when it gets to some of the more threatening stuff, it can't help itself by doing really questionable humor, having really odd kind of scenarios that do take place, and taking away for some of the threat aspect of the film, which I think is a bit of a shame ultimately. So what are your thoughts and opinions on Mr. Vampire 4? Please comment down below. What is your favourite of the series of Mr. Vampire? I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions. Please comment down below. So in the meantime, it goes on for reviews. Signing out.